Hello, my name is Debbie Boone, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, The Bend, where we explore how successful people navigated the path and emerged in a better place when life threw them an unexpected twist. It's inspired by one of my favorite sayings: the bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the curve. These conversations will hopefully help you and inspire you to embrace your personal bend and to flourish. I hope you enjoy it, and if you need help with your own personal navigation and you're in veterinary medicine, please feel free to reach out to me at Debbie Boone 2 Manage Vets Consulting. Enjoy the bend and be inspired by our wonderful guest. Welcome. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode of The Bend. So today I want to introduce you to my guest, Rob Best. Now, Rob is a certified expert in neuroleadership, which just made my radar go off because I think this is the most fun subject we can talk about, and it's centered around emotional intelligence. He also knows a little something about a lot of things because he was a basketball player at NBA level. He's been a world explorer who's been through 6 of the 7 continents. We're going to see which one you were missing. And he was the CEO of a global nonprofit supporting teenage entrepreneurs in over 30 countries. He holds 2 bachelor's degrees, one in business and one in organizational communication. And he earned his CVPM. So I'm curious about that because we have that in common. He's an expert in body language, statement analysis, and deception detection, which could be really helpful on job interviews. And if you think he looks familiar, you're probably right because he is a well-known keynote speaker and also a regular guest on podcast and TV, where he gets to talk about profiling criminal suspects and celebrities for possible deception. He loves his work and he is excited for new experiences. So he invites you to introduce yourself and share your story if you are out and about and you see Rob. So Rob, thanks for coming on. I look forward to exploring a lot of the things that we have in common.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So I'd like to find out, obviously you have a very diverse background. How in the world did you end up in veterinary medicine and getting your CVPM from being an NBA basketball player?
It was all unintentional, and I almost made the NBA. I had a few opportunities to play in the NBA Summer Pro League, but I never got a full season contract. So I don't want to give the impression. Most of my career was in other countries, but it was quite honestly a dare. Somebody introduced me to someone else who worked in the industry, and it had nothing to do with vet med. We had a different alignment to get to know each other on. And by the end of our first breakfast together, this person offered me a job in vet med. And I said no. Over the next 4 years, the conversation continued. And he eventually, instead of offering me something, he challenged me on something, like a little reverse psychology, right? And it worked. So he tricked me into giving a year to vet med. And that was 15 years ago. Fell in love with the people, as most all of us do, and I'm never leaving.
Good. Well, I do agree with you that I feel like I was so lucky to end up in vet med, and I've been doing it since 1985. Started as a part-time receptionist, and I just love the profession, and I don't think there's probably a better job on earth if we do it well and we train our leaders well and we have a great culture in our teams, because that all reflects on how happy we are in the job. So tell me a little bit about working in veterinary medicine and how you used the coaching and the neuro leadership to develop teams within the vet med world.
It's, what makes that such a good question for me to hear is because I don't reflect often on this. I did work like this outside the industry, and that was part of the intrigue. Can this work in veterinary medicine and with a science community and brilliant doctors and service teams that support the doctors? So there was a element of excitement for me just around the opportunity to experiment and see if this could help. End of the story. Of course it helps. Human behavior is human behavior. If we forget industry for a moment, right? 100% of our employees are people. 100% of our clients are people. Our patients are furry, but our clients are people. And 100% of our investors that have a vested interest in our businesses are people. If you don't know people, you don't know business.
Mhm.
And yes, the nuances from industry to industry will shift. Some of the language will shift. However, the people component and the baseline of how our behaviors influence results, that's consistent across the board. So it took me some time clearly to learn to understand the language of veterinary medicine and the culture of our industry, and of which I'll say I'm still learning, of course. But it was at least 2 full years before I started to feel some level of confidence that, okay, I'm feeling like I'm in a place where I belong, and the language is starting to make sense.
Yeah. And I think that that 1 year, 2 year mark is pretty consistent for every kind of change that we go through in life. In my career, I have changed two large practices from taking appointments, from not taking appointments into taking appointments. And at first, everybody thinks, oh, this will never work. Yeah, I can remember my first boss saying the animals will get well before we get them in here. I'm like, no, they really won't. And it's just a way to organize things. But you have to kind of retrain your clients. And after a year, they've all learned this is the new drill. And I think a lot of times in vet med, particularly because we are so empathetic, that we forget that we train our clients bad behavior and we accept our clients bad behavior, and then we suffer no boundaries because of the gates that we let pour open there. So I feel like we are more aware and cognitive of the way that we shape behaviors, and that's what intrigued me about neuroscience. I think many years ago I was speaking at AHA before they had changed the name two other times. Now it's just, and they gave me a book as a speaker gift, and it was called Brain Rules by Dr. John Medina. And I just love this book. I still have it on my shelf. I still refer back to it. But I thought this is so brilliant. The stuff that we were learning with functional MRIs, the way that you could understand people's emotion better because of these trigger points. And I thought, man, this is what everybody needs to know. And so I'm glad that you're out there talking about it, and I feel like it is so valuable for people to understand their own mind and using that towards emotional intelligence, and the mind of the person on the other side of that exam table or counter, why they're behaving the way they behave. And I am fear free certified, and I sit on the advisory board. But when I started taking my fear free training, I went, oh my God, this is exactly what I teach for people. And because behavior is behavior. You said business is business, and I agree with that, because the rules of business are the rules of business, but the rules of behavior are the rules of behavior too.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So talking a little bit about some of the behavior stuff that you train people. You talk about emotional intelligence, and how do you use that kind of training to improve not only the customer journey but the team culture?
If you get into the weeds, it's going to be a little different for each team, right? It's specific to, well, what is your mission and your vision, and what are your core values, and it's so very different from single team to single team. However, the consistency is, and this is, I'm clearly biased for, right, but so my consistency, which for some people seems to work well, is rooted in how do we grow the levels of emotional safety that exists in the environment. And emotional intelligence becomes the caveat, the direct path to increasing emotional safety. Some people will know this as psychological safety. And my work is really stemming from this area of psychological leadership rooted with emotional safety. Those 5 components of emotional intelligence, right? The very first one is usually the easiest for all of us to grow, which is self-awareness. Just a brief moment in front of a mirror or a brief moment with a trusted colleague, friend, or family member can help us receive intentional or unintentional feedback that grows our self-awareness. That's a pretty easy one to boost, so anytime you can think of yourselves as receiving feedback where you thought, wow, yeah, give yourself a pat on the back because you have just grown your emotional intelligence, right? Far more effective for career development and relationship development than IQ ever will be. So you're right, you guys are moving in the right direction. The second component of the 5 is arguably the most challenging, and that's self-regulation. So now that I'm more aware of what my behaviors are and what they might mean to the influence of my own thoughts and the influence of other people's reactions and behaviors, how do I now regulate my behaviors with greater intention? And very easy to learn to understand it, to apply it, and to make it a habit is a whole different conversation. Then we can spiral into the rest of the EQ components when we talk about the team environment. The social motivation and social awareness is what surfaces most, because now it's piecing several things together. And that's when we get into the weeds for what's specific from one practice or one team to another. But yeah, that simplified piece, become more self-aware and learn how to regulate behaviors that are intended to help people feel more emotionally safe in our presence. Those are the primary keys that we grow from.
Yeah, let's talk about that self-regulation a little bit because I think that is so important. I've had people tell me in the past, "Oh, people make me mad." And I will, well, you can control that. No, I can't. People just make me mad. And I just go off on a tangent. And I said, okay, if the people who made you mad was a 350-pound lineman from, the Baltimore Ravens, and he was giving you a hard time, would you control yourself? And I go, well, yeah, because he's going to squish me like a bug. I think it was so, okay, so you can regulate yourself. You just don't want to regulate yourself a lot of times because it feels good to let all that hang out, right? And I actually had a CSR tell me that one day. She said, I just get so mad about this stuff. And I went, but that's part of being a grown up. You learn to have more self control the older you get, I think. Now, some people will truly never do. And I believe that that's probably one of the reasons maybe they always struggle to succeed in life, because without collaboration among humans, your success cannot be possible. And it's other people who lift you up. And I know that you certainly are aware of that because you've you had some very interesting connections in your life, including Kobe Bryant. So I think that's that obviously is a networking thing that's going to be important to boost career. But you helped Kobe too. And so there was a positive synergy to those connections. But let's talk a little bit about what you would coach people to do when they get into a conflict situation or one where they've been given feedback that they just don't like it. I hear this a lot, and probably you do too, because I feel like everybody who coaches teams hears this stuff. Is that people who are even getting feedback given into the most kind way will often just disintegrate and melt because they just cannot stand any negative feedback, and that is hard for them to take because sometimes I think they've grown up being praised so much for next to nothing that a little bit of pushback and a little reality check causes them to not be able to manage, and they'll quit. That's the amazing thing is they just
Yeah.
quit. So I'd love to hear your comments and take on that.
Oh, this is so good. And when we first talked about this, you were spot on with our alignment and interest. And you can probably even see, like I'm bouncing, I'm getting excited, I just love these topics primarily because they're so effective with people in their work life and their home life, right? So I'm hearing two really meaningful topics that are being introduced here. One is our emotion regulation, and the other is the process of feedback, whether giving and or receiving. And they go hand in hand. So first, for some context, and I won't go over sciencey, like, well, if we're looking at emotion regulation, that little piece of your brain called the amygdala, many of you have probably heard of it. Debbie, I know you're familiar with it. When we feel an emotion, the amygdala in the brain, which drives this emotion, it physically enlarges and it sends all of this information from the like back center of the brain into the front of the brain where our prefrontal cortex is. So this is all of our executive function, right? This is logic, rationale, decision, right? The amygdala sending all this emotion up here clouds our ability to be logical or rational. On average, all humans, on average, over 80% of the decisions we make in life are driven by these emotions. We use logic and rational thought to support our emotional decision making. And this isn't a bad or good or pro or con. It just is what it is. This is the science, this is the wiring of our brain. Okay, so if we're aware of it, well, what can we do about it? Well, there's things we can learn that can deactivate our amygdala and increase the level of executive functioning. So we do become more intentional with our logical thoughts and our rationale, right? That's for a different piece. So right there's the context. The emotions are real, and we will find ourselves making comments like you mentioned. I'm angry. This makes me angry. I am angry. And the one piece here that'll help us transition into the feedback portion is the best advice that someone could possibly give anyone who's in that mindset of heavy emotion, and they might be self-talking or verbalizing it. I am angry. One of the best first things you can do is simply change your language, which in a way will shift your mindset. It's not I am angry. No, your name is Debbie.
Yes.
You feel angry, and that is okay. You can feel the emotion and then begin to separate from the emotion, which is very different from when we use words that identify the emotion as being part of our character. So when Debbie says, I am angry, Debbie, no, you're Debbie, and you feel angry, and that's okay, right? So we know that we're going to feel a kaleidoscope of emotions when we receive feedback, whether it's positive, negative, or neutral. Feedback is really difficult for a lot of people, and some may understand this, others won't. But the levels of anxiety are actually higher for the person giving the feedback than it is for the person receiving it.
I would,
So
as a person who's had to do that, I agree with that because you're thinking about it for hours before you actually bring somebody into your office and say, I really need to talk to you about this activity that you're doing that is inappropriate. And you
yeah,
are sweating bullets. And, I don't know about you, but to this day, I remember the first person I ever fired in my career. And I can see her in my mind as clearly, and it's been 35 years ago, but I know that. And so it does affect the person too.
it
Yeah.
does. And you're right. Part of it is that the person giving feedback knows the conversation's coming. And so the mind will wander, right? The self-talk kicks in, all those things. Yeah, there's another fun fact for you, by the way. Our minds are going to self-talk between 300 to 1,000 words every minute of every day. So
God.
if you know that you have a day, a week, maybe even a month because you're preparing for annual performance reviews, all of that time, there's moments where some of that internal dialogue that is self-talking is going to go in various, and yes, it's going to grow that anxiety, right? Okay, but now we're in the room and we're in the mode of feedback. For those receiving feedback, leaders included, this is for everyone receiving feedback. It is important to know going in that all feedback is true. That's hard for some people to accept. And the context for understanding is this. Also, the one piece, let's just put to the side, assume positive intentions, right? This isn't a leader who has malice intent behind giving feedback. No, there's good intentions. All feedback you receive is true. You might not agree with the feedback, and that's okay. However, how you are occurring to the other person is factual to that person, which makes the feedback true. So the question that that you have to ask yourself is, okay, what are the adjustments that I can make so that I occur in the way that I intend to occur for the other person, whoever they happen to be in my life, my professional superior, my significant other, my family member, my friend, whomever it happens to be. All feedback you receive is true. And if you walk into the room with that understanding and with the anticipation of receiving something that you are possibly unaware of, with the ability to use that to grow and to become better, it can help settle some of those emotions that are driven by things like uncertainty or the possible threat of your sense of status or autonomy. Yeah, feedback is such a cool topic.
Well, we also think about it in the form of customer complaints.
Mm,
And if we would think about that the customer is complaining, why? Because it is their truth. It's like you said, whether it is true or not, it's true to them. It's how they
yeah,
perceived it. It's how it made them feel, whether it was intentional on your part or not. So when we start to be curious and ask questions, we often will find out that we did say something that triggered them. There's a story that always comes to my mind, and you think, wow, there was a veterinarian who was doing a physical exam on a dog, and the client was one of those chatty clients, and she had her stethoscope and she was listening, and the client continued to talk, and so she held her finger up in the air, just like, "Can you give me just a moment?" And she didn't say anything. She just held her finger up, and this client went bonkers, just went bonkers, because to her, it was so disrespectful. And come to find out, after all the questioning was done and the root of this revealed, because, all conflict is rooted in the past. So
yeah.
it was her grandmother who used to do that when she was small. She'd hold that finger up in the air and point at her and not allow her to finish having a conversation. And she just that all that emotion from the past came right back into that exam room, where the doctor had no intention of being rude whatsoever. She was just trying to listen to the cat's respiration rate. So we don't really know what triggers others off. And that's where that emotional control for our part comes in, to say, well, let me be curious and find out what is going on with that person, and
Yeah.
understanding your own triggers, because you're right. That limbic brain back there just will throw hormones at you, and you'll fly hot, and you go, oh my gosh, how many times have I said, why did I say that? That was the thing I
Yes.
might have said in a conversation that just set somebody off. And in me, it's particularly, in my family and my husband. We're like, oh, why did I say
Well, that's a great moment to acknowledge and give ourselves grace.
that?
It's not only because we're aware that this happens and we just blindly accept it. When we think about triggers and the emotional reaction that follows, these are things that are biologic. We're not talking about learned behaviors. Now, there's a trigger for the client with her grandmother, right?
Right.
This part becomes a learned behavior. Prior to that behavior, the piece that triggers the amygdala is more connected to things that are biologic. For example, we're all going to have somewhere between 3 to 5 very particular biologic reactions that occur when we start to feel defensive. And when we feel defensive, the learned behaviors then follow. So if you have a leader at a practice who has a tendency to exit the room when two employees happen to be in conflict. Let's say it's an appropriate conflict. There's a disagreement. It's not like it's heightened or there's a lot of emotion. Someone needs to step in and referee. No, but it's clear that they're not agreeing, and this isn't a moment where the leader is necessarily walking away with the intent that, hey, they've already had some coaching and now they're going to learn how to work their way through it, and I don't want to step in and create this system of learned helplessness, right? No, this is more like the leader has a tendency just to exit stage left. An example like that could stem, doesn't mean it does, but it could stem from, let's say, when this person was a child at home and the parents would argue, there would be a biologic reaction. And I mean, things like the hands would get sweaty, the hair would stand up on your arm, your breath rate would increase. You find yourself fidgeting and moving around. Like there's these biologic reactions that happen first, and that's your key. That's your I am now becoming defensive. The next step is what becomes a learned behavior. And in this person's home environment as a child, he or she may have found emotional safety by exiting the area where the parents are arguing and would go to their room or go outside or go someplace, right? So now as an adult, what you see manifesting is the biologic defenses occur. They're not aware of them though. And the next step is the learned behavior happens, which is the leader leaves the room when two employees happen to be having a disagreement. And that's where we can see some of those connections. But you notice how I snuck it in. The purpose for the work that I do with people is still rooted in, well, where's the emotional safety? So here's a leader who might struggle with emotional safety and exit the room. So our work becomes, well, how do we reestablish that safety?
Frustrated group of team members who go, there's no coaching done here. There's no intervention of bad behavior. People just tuck tail and run in avoidance of conflict. And that's a huge problem. I mean, nobody likes conflict, but I always feel like once we move into it rather than run from it, and we move into it correctly with curiosity and questions rather than accusations and intent to kill, let's put it that way, um,
Yeah.
that we come out of it going, gosh, I'm so glad we did that. I'm so glad we cleared the air and we got that straightened out. And coaching an entire team to learn those skills is obviously a challenge, but I feel like people embrace that once they have the opportunity to learn. And we certainly are in a scientific community who understands, hormones, limbic brain flooding, and truly, I typically ask people in my classes, how many of you are fear-free certified? And for those who raise their hand, you know this stuff. You just know it for the dog. You just don't know it
Yep.
for the human. But just move
Yes.
over into that because that's exactly what happens. So I'm curious in um, in working with teams, how do you kind of explore what's going on in those groups and decide how to help them get through whatever it is that they're dealing with?
So again, when we get into the weeds of it, it can look very different from team to team once we discover what the root might be, the root concerns or causes might be. However, part of the consistency is connected to something you mentioned just a moment ago, which is when people have an opportunity to learn, most of the time they lean in proactively to the growth. It's not like you've got to put them through a workshop that's rooted in growth mindsets and learning how to establish a growth. No, they do it very naturally. And this is where I don't need to go to the science. We can just look at an athletic background. And I know you're very familiar with this yourself. When we practice before the games, right? Regardless of what the sport is, or regardless if it's an individual, a dual, or a large team sport, practice is a controlled environment for failure. It is quite literally an environment that is created with the intent to fail so that you can learn prior to getting in the game, right? Imagine if our professional teams, imagine if you knew walking into the hospital that I'm human, my leadership team knows that I'm human, and every day at this hospital, I am quite literally on a practice field. And I'm going to make errors. I'm going to make mistakes. And so long as they are not egregious or with intent that is negative, and so long as I'm willing to self-examine and learn, then it's okay. It's okay for them. It's okay for me. It's okay for my colleague. Now we've shifted the environment in a way that can shift our culture. And if we're talking about cultural shifts, now it's long-term, sustainable. We're talking about habit formation, not momentary quick fixes. But that ability to establish an environment, again, emotionally safe environment where people feel comfortable to make a mistake and know that it's an opportunity to learn, not a moment where you're going to be ridiculed, right? I mean, the oversimplify the basics. Humans need what above all else in business? They need a sense of authenticity from leadership. What follows that when they're communicating, this means that these people need to feel heard and understood, not corrected and rejected. So when the mistake occurs, we engage the dialogue so they feel heard and understood. Now we can talk about what comes next. And of course, there's
Coaching and
many
training.
other steps that you're very aware of.
Well, this is really for our audience to listen to, and I'm just like cheerleading over here on the side. But I feel like that's so valuable. And when people are not comfortable making a mistake, and I laughingly call it confessing your sins, then you get into a lot of trouble, especially in a medical facility. There are people who will, make a mistake, and then maybe it's the wrong medication. Maybe they gave an animal too many fluids. Maybe they, said something inadvertent to a client that was inappropriate. And if we don't have an environment where those things can be confessed and then worked through, it's going to occur more and more. And, our patients are going to suffer, our clients are going to suffer, and we're going to suffer because that means that I never feel safe at work. I'm always on high alert. And those hormone spikes that are popping up into my brain continually from stress are making it worse. Um, I listened to something the other day, and I want to get your feedback on this because I feel like this for me made so much sense. Simon Sinek in Leaders Eat Last
Yep.
made a comment that said it's not work-life balance is not about time. And when he said that, I just about jumped out of my airplane seat and went, hell yeah. So it is about the amount of hormones, the positive, happy hormones that are flooding your body, as opposed to those negative stressed hormones. So you can work in a stressful situation for 10 hours a week and still not have balance in your life because the stress is so high on that side of the seesaw. But you could work 50 hours a week in a place where everybody is just having a ball doing their thing, loving what they do, and your stress levels are next to nothing and your happiness level is high. So I just really feel like it is so important for people to know that, first of all, do not feel guilty about not having a balanced life because it's just bullshit. And
Yep.
there is no balance. It is just where you happen to be at the moment in time in that seesaw that life is going to throw you some stuff. But also understand it is not about time either. And I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Oh, it's so I love this. Okay, you and I were at some meetings recently where of the several valuable topics that were discussed, one of them that maybe even unintentionally surfaced and was repeated multiple times was this discussion around work-life balance. Common discussion in general, perhaps even more consistent in veterinary medicine than many other industries. Every time I hear the phrase work-life balance, I cringe a little bit for some of the similar reasons as you, of course. In addition, when we categorize it as work-life balance, we have minimized our opportunity to broaden a perspective of reality, which is no, it's not limited to work and life. No, it is a life balance, if you want to use the word balance, but that life balance that we might seek encompasses a whole bunch of things, and work is just one piece of that. So that is a baseline. The next step is, okay, my balance or potential balance is going to be different than the person next to me. So let me avoid the potential to compare and contrast how many hours I work or they work, or right. So let me just internalize and be very willing to self-examine for a moment. And as I self-examine, I become more aware of, yes, where I'm giving my time by choice in most cases, and where my levels of energy are within those time components. So the first piece of feedback that I would give in the way you asked the question is, there was a recent article in Forbes that came by way of the HBR Harvard Business Review, and it talks about the science of managing our energy and how it is a far more accurate behavioral line to follow than an attempt to manage time. So that's the first piece. How do we manage our energy, not our time? And what is that level of energy with regards to the various topics? Today, work, life, family, my dog, my cat, my bird, right? Like, where does that fall? And if it's a little too heavy on one side one day, well, we can, when possible, shift and adjust for something else on the next day. The next piece is, after managing the energy, is, and by the way, I love that it's Simon Sinek and leaders eat last. The best piece for leaders to know here is we often do eat last, but we don't have to eat alone.
Right.
Um, right. So we get opportunities like this to connect and talk about these topics. So if Debbie, you're well known and respected in the industry, anyone who might have you on this pedestal, like many of us have, I know how open and willing and driven you are to help people. I would say never hesitate to reach out. These connections and these relationships are what help all of us. We don't have to eat last, even if we're eating, or I mean, we don't have to eat alone. Even if we are eating last, let's lean on each other. So this next piece that I'm leaning into with the idea of work-life balance and energy is when we are present and aware of our true presence, right? I mean, truly present, not future, not past, right? Future is if the past is history, the future is a mystery. And if we spend our time there, we go in the past, this is where we find connections to depression. We go in the future, we find connections to anxiety. So the first is, okay, well, let's establish some presence and really be mindful of what's in front of us. The next is what's in front of us oftentimes might initiate some stress. So if I'm off balance that day and the stress begins to be felt, my feedback here is lean into some of the research behind Kelly McGonigal. She's got an incredible book called The Upside of Stress, and she breaks down all of the physiological changes that occur when we make a conscious decision to shift our mindset when we begin to experience stress and the emotions that follow. One tiny example, if I'm feeling stressed and my current mindset is this is negative, this is heavy, and I feel myself spiraling downward. That spiral will continue downward and it'll continue to become heavier and heavier. If I choose to view the stress as a challenge and I buy into the belief that I can make a decision that can alter what's occurring with this stress, physiologically, my entire body shifts to the extent where I literally find measurable improvements in the health of my heart. And if we think about just the daily, let's not go extremes, let's just talk about our daily stressors and how we react to them today and how that might change if those stressors became conscious decisions. For some, it might be, myself being one of these, a challenge. Right? Stress is a challenge. If I have the scale of 0 to 10, and 10 means fate doesn't exist. Life is all about decisions, right? 0 is choices mean nothing. They don't exist. Everything in life is about fate. There's no right or wrong along the scale. However, what this scale means to our mindset is the more we lean toward the belief that decisions matter, the more we can identify stressful moments as opportunities to make other decisions. And it can send us on that upward spiral of positivity. I'm going to stop there because I will jump on that spiral bandwagon next.
Right.
And
Well, no, I mean, I feel like this is such an important point because some stress is good, and I think that's what people don't really understand a lot, especially younger people who haven't kind of gone through the grind yet. And there's a lot of things that really grind you down, but they polish you. They're the way I look at it is like the pressure over time can either crush coal or make it into a diamond. So it depends on how rapid and hard the stress is. So if you have over time some stress that is teaching you things that, like, I mean, you have 2 degrees, I have a degree, I have a CVPM. Those are stressful things to learn, but they put the pressure in the right way that says, and the outcome is worth the pressure that was there. And I think veterinary school is the same way. There's an inordinate amount of pressure in veterinary school, and there's so
Mm.
much to learn there. But it also is helping you reach the goal that you had probably since you were 5 years old, is to be a veterinarian. So we have to look at things like, okay, if I'm going to learn how to use the ultrasound machine, if I'm going to learn how to use laser therapy, yes, there's pressure. Yes, my perfectionism is struggling here with not being absolutely perfect while I'm learning, but I'm learning to shine bright.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just learning to shine. Um, and I feel like that's really such a valuable lesson for people who think they're not supposed to have any stress in life at all, because life is stressful. But going back to something you said about decision making, when you have opportunity to use the smart part of your brain rather than the emotion, then we need to look at situations, because many times people will put themselves into situations that cause them a great deal of stress that they could have avoided just because they made a decision to get into it. And some of this has to do, I've seen it so much over the years because I managed people for so long, is they get involved with like remote family members or friends of a friend. And you're like, why are you even messing with those people? First of all, you are the sum of the people you surround yourself with. So don't surround yourself with people who are that way, and deliberately choose to work around and be around people who lift you up and make you better, rather than who drag you into the dirt and make you worse, and cause you a great deal of stress. Because some of over the years, the excuses that I have gotten for not showing up for work are just off the wall, and you just want to say, this is really a bad decision on your part to get involved in this, but you're a grown person, so I'm going to have to let you run with it. But oh my goodness, it's really so talking about mistakes, uh, let's talk about mistakes. What do you think was your biggest mistake in your career?
Gosh, the biggest mistake is tough for me because I've made so many. And and that's not, it's quite true. Um, However, one of the mistakes that has always stood out as being meaningful, and other people that may have been in the room probably don't even remember that this occurred, but it stuck with me, and it altered the way that I choose to behave around people and in situations. I was conducting a 2-day workshop for some hospitals out in the Chicago area, and we had a mix of hospitals and hospital representatives. So doctors, former practice owners, CSRs, techs, licensed and vet assistants, just a mix, a really good mix. There were even some executives that were there. And this gives an opportunity to lean into a variety of topics in ways that help people in a room with so much variety to learn to better understand each other, right? Because we know inside the hospital, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes we're so siloed that there's just a lack of understanding that comes with a lack of exposure. So this is one of those intentional opportunities where we can really learn from each other. And we got into one of these conversations about futuristic opportunities in our industry. And we somehow went down this road of, what does a veterinary lobby of the future look like if all cylinders are firing with, this is the ideal client experience? And one of the more radical ideas that we all thought sounded really cool was, there's no reception desk and there's no receptionist. For a lobby of the future, having a pet parent walk in and approach a lobby desk with computers and other things, things that might distract someone on site from giving attention or paying attention to the pet parents, it's a non-necessity. Is there administrative work that needs to be done oftentimes at a desk? Sure. There's no reason that that has to occur in front of a client. You can have greeters who have tablets, as an example, and can just greet you and check you in and get additional history and prepare you for the visit. The idea of a reception desk and the reception work can live someplace else in the hospital. It does not need to be in the view of clients. And so we're having fun talking about, wow, this could really work. There was a CSR in the room who had been in the industry for 3 or 4 years and absolutely loved her job. And unintentionally, my feeding of this idea led her to believe that she might lose her job because if there's no reception desk in the waiting area, then there's no need for reception employees.
Right.
Hence, if the industry goes this way, she's out of a job, the job that she loves. So at some point, we had a break and she was super emotional, like tears, right? And when we realized what led to her feeling this way, I of course felt awful. And it led to some really good afternoon conversations and, what the design would look like and how these, and she loved where we went after that. The reason I identify this as such a meaningful moment is I was unaware of my level of influence at that time.
Wow.
In my mind, I'm thinking I'm one person. I might be leading this experience, but I'm one person in a room of 30 plus people, a few of which were high level professional superiors of hers. Like they should be much more influential. No. It was my ability to be influential in a room, which is a big part of my job, especially if I'm doing well and I'm influencing the. This is a moment where I didn't influence in the intended way, and it caused emotional harm, not emotional safety, which is my goal.
Right. Yeah.
That day and forward doesn't mean that I no longer make mistakes with my presence. However, my awareness of my presence and my level of intentionality became far more regulated than it had ever been. And in fact, I probably went a little too far, and I was not necessarily robotic or unauthentic, but I was probably a little too polished for a time period because I was so cautious,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that sticks with me most.
Well, it's when you were talking about that, I thought about I was teaching a class for Patterson, and I think it was in the Atlanta area, and it was a really big class. They had packed the room more than my. I usually try to tell them to do between 25 and 30 people because you get too many people in the room. There's a very interesting dynamic in a group like that, and so you can have too many people where nobody feels comfortable talking, or you have too few people where nobody feels comfortable talking because they feel like they stand out. But anyway, this was a really packed room, and I was talking about client service, about practicing good medicine, and we kind of got off on this tangent about, and it really wasn't me that did it, but somebody else did it, about low quality care of this spay and neuter clinic where they were having to fix somebody's mess and they were coming in because they had dehisced and how many cases there were. And I should have stopped it before it got too far, because realizing that the people they were talking about were in the room. And of course, I wasn't from there, so I did not know that, but it's still knowing that I needed to stop it. As a speaker, I learned from that experience, right? And so I learned to say two things. There's a place for everybody in this profession, and I am a medicine snob because I grew up in AHA accredited hospitals, and I'm confessing it right here, right now. So you know where I'm coming from, but I also believe that there's a place for everybody in this profession. So you started out on the right foot rather than kind of backing into it like I had to fix what had happened in there. But that's okay because those things are learning experiences, and I think it's what makes you better at your job and a better speaker. um, taking surveys and getting feedback. Speakers do that too,
Yeah.
and writers, and we all do it. And sometimes it's not what we wanted to hear, but oftentimes it does help us, and it makes us better if we listen with open heart rather than defensiveness. Like, no, 50 people thought I was great, and there's this one who's complaining. Well, it's just the same for the clients. There may be 50 clients that day who thought you walked on water, and but the one actually called out what was going on with the other 50 that they didn't bother to mention. So, yeah.
Yes, yes.
So Rob, you and I have been in this profession for a while, but we just met. Oh, what, last week, week before last?
Yes.
So let's talk about networking, because I feel like for a lot of people, certainly in our position, we know the value of networking and getting out there and meeting people, but people are often uncomfortable meeting a stranger or walking up to somebody who they, think is an influencer in the profession, and just saying, "Hey, I really would like to meet you and talk to you." So let's talk a little bit about how networking has benefited your career, and some tips that you might have to help people who aren't comfortable there get out there and do a little bit better job of networking.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's widely expressed that in veterinary medicine, the majority of the population are considered introverts. And it's an even greater challenge to attempt to get out there and with intent meet people and develop relationships. And so when preparing for our conversation today, uh, you do such an incredible job in helping us be prepared with topics. And one of the overlying parts of the conversation I wanted to make sure I was prepared with today was things that would relate to resilience. And we're touching on, right, the emotions that are triggered with feedback conversations, the work-life balance, all these touch points can mistakes that we've made can relate to resilience. And I had a keynote that I was giving for a couple of years on this topic, and I identified 3 areas of opportunity to grow our resilience. No matter where our resilience is today, we can grow it. And here are 3 buckets of opportunity: mental, physical, and social. And specific to this part of the conversation, our opportunity to grow our resilience is one of the reasons that we would want to feel encouraged to lean into growing our social network. If we want to look at it strictly professionally, your network determines your net worth, right? That's obviously been said many times. It's not mine. However, I clearly buy into it. So then how do we get past some of that scary uncertainty to initiate conversations? Well, if we look at the mindset that surrounds that social network, and identify some of the uncertainties and the fears that exist, and then compare and contrast it to the positives. I've got a whole long list. If I talk about those 3 buckets, and one of those long lists is the social list. And one of the bullets that people are oftentimes, especially in this industry, attracted to is one of those bullets is boundaries. So if I'm approaching a conversation, yes, there's the desire to share and receive, and part of that includes, yes, you can keep a boundary. Whatever that boundary is for you, you can establish where your safe boundaries are, and you can maintain those. So going in prior to the conversation, having an understanding of where those safe boundaries are and learning how to safely communicate them can add to your level of confidence just to have the conversation. So next is, now I'm going to the conversation. What's some low-hanging fruit tips that can help? I love this one, and it applies to conversations that can be difficult as well. So whether you're having a difficult conversation or you're going into a network meeting, this applies for both. And it comes from the book, Crucial Conversations. Debbie, I know you're familiar with it. I'm sure many of your listeners are as well. There's 3 things that you do, and you can do this within seconds before entering a conversation. You can also sit down and pre-plan for an hour if you have the time available. But you need to answer 3 questions for yourself before the conversation begins. The first, what is it that you want for the other person? The second, what is it that you want for you? And the third and most important, and this is the one that oftentimes will change what your approach is and how you open the conversation. What is it that you want for the relationship between yourself and the other person? That one's key. When you focus on the relationship that you want as an outcome of the conversation, it shifts this idea of uncertainty that may fall under elements like, I don't know if they'll like me. Are they going to see that I'm nervous? Will I be accepted? Right. And it's directly connected to these neurologic social needs that we all have, and we're triggered in different ways. And one of the most consistent ways for this one is simply uncertainty. Uncertainty is one of 5 specific neurologic triggers that we have. And when attempting to grow our social network, the level of uncertainty is one of the first triggers we're going to experience, because we don't know what their response is going to be, or their level of acceptance of us will happen to be. So if my mindset is focused on an understanding what I want for them, what I want for me, but a real focus on what do I want for the relationship, if your goal is, I simply would like to get to know this person and have an opportunity to continue some dialogue that may become mutually beneficial, that mindset alone will change the route of your conversation altogether. And for those who need actual steps, there's a guy that you can find on LinkedIn named Jeff Hayes. Jeff Hayes runs a company with marketing and branding, and he built a system specifically for networking events that is so well laid out. So anyone out there, you can search Jeff Hayes, Hayes, and you'll find him on LinkedIn. You'll find his system for networking. It's one of the best I've seen that just says A, B, C, D. Do this, do this, do this, and it includes the suggested comments and statements, whether it's for opening the conversation or boundaries for how to back out of the conversation and move on. It's super well done. I think it would apply really, really well for people in our industry who have some uncertainty here.
Yeah, I like that. I gave a talk maybe a year or so ago at AHA on how to meet a stranger. And
Ah,
I love doing talks for AHA because they just turn me loose and they just say, do what you want to do, Deb, which is great as a speaker. Because there's things that I really want to tell people. And talking to strangers is one of the things I've wanted to share. So I started the presentation off with, I'm one of those people who talks to people on airplanes. And everybody went, and I said, I but I've met amazing and fascinating people on the airplanes. And the whole goal of that is, to kind of entertain myself. But I have this innate curiosity about other people and what they do and how they got there. And this is one of the pleasures of doing this bend, because the stories are always so fascinating about how you got from A to B. And it's probably not really A to B, it's more like A to X with B, C, D. And
yes.
And I feel like if you were thinking about networking as it's only for my benefit, it's only for so I can maybe sell somebody something, or I can get something from them, then you're going to fail at networking, because people have radar and they pick that up. I know you're a body language expert, so you understand what I'm talking about. Is everything you can see in that is, it's not about I'm genuinely interested in you as a person. It's about, where can you take me? Because this is where I want
Yes.
to go. And so just being truly interested in another person and what their likes and dislikes are, what their passion is, what they love about what they do, what really aggravates them about the things that they do.
Yeah.
So much fodder for good questions. And I feel like that's all we need to do is, if we just ask good questions, other people will lead the conversation, because people like to talk about themselves. And that's okay, because that's what's interesting to me is listening to what other people think and know and do and how they got there.
Yes.
Because I think about one of the things that surprised me so much on this show was that Karen Feldstead wanted to be a ballerina when she was little.
I never knew that.
Yeah, and I was home to my mom's, and my mom was cleaning out all these closets, and there were my toe shoes, and I took a picture of them, and I said, "Karen, look." Me too. So what about, I didn't want to be a ballerina anymore. It hurt. I'm like, I'm done.
Oh.
I'm done. Oh my gosh. Um, so Rob, anything that you wanted to talk about, we didn't get to, so we've got some time. Let's think about what we want to talk about.
Gosh, I mean, I love the dialogue. I mean, and our ability to find so much relatedness on these topics. And maybe that is the driver here. So we talked about networking relationships. I just mentioned relatedness. I mentioned a moment ago, certainty is one of those neurologic social needs. Relatedness is another one of those neurologic social needs. And if we put this in the context of how do I take better care of myself, right? Like what about my well-being? Neurologically, our brains are wired to connect with other humans. Yes, it's different for each individual, the levels of connectedness, how many people, to what depths each connection may have, that varies for each person. So some are high, some are low, some are medium. We get that. What is consistent is all humans for positive health require positive connections with other humans, right? And I'm a classic example, just a background that does not have strong connections. So I'm very cautious as an adult. I'm much better today at giving trust in my life than I was just 5 years ago, 10 years ago. However, it is even though it's a known thing, connectedness is a necessity for my health. I still struggle with seeking the connectedness. So for those of you who really struggle and you feel the introverted side really driving a lot of your communication, I'm with you. And I probably give an extroverted um, sense of character here. I'm not. I'm very what's called ambivert or versatile. I'm a strong extrovert at times, and I'm a strong introvert at times. And in fact, every human is a mix. No one's just one or the other. So where do we tap into the ability to be a little more extroverted and lean in for some connectedness? Well, if we can first establish an understanding and a belief that, yes, when I connect with another person, it helps my well-being. And I mentioned that the resilience keynote a moment ago. I I don't often wear, just basic t-shirts if I'm going to be on a recorded video that people might see for something professional. I'm not going to suit and tie up either, but I'll be a little more professionally presentable, if you would. However, this particular keynote surrounds a story about finishing an Ironman race. I've been doing a lot of endurance athletics, and an Ironman became one of my next goals. And the simplified story is less than 10 minutes into the first leg, which is a swim, I had a bit of a panic attack and I swam over to a lifeguard and I was tapping out. The lifeguard was incredible. And the end of the story is I finished the Ironman. Um, but part of what was required for me to get back into the game, if you would, was an ability to accept the need for social connectedness. And so as I hung on her surfboard and I looked with her guidance, and I see 1,000 people swimming in the ocean who all just spent months and for some of them years training for this event, there's immediate social connectedness for me. They know what it was like to struggle the way I struggled leading up to that day. And it was one of three specific drivers for me to start swimming and finish that Ironman. The other reason I'm wearing the t-shirt is it's hard for me to get shirts on and off right now because a couple of weeks ago I broke my arm. One of the one of the legs in an Ironman, the third or the second of the three legs, is a bike ride. So I was on a bike ride a couple of weeks ago, and a fence clipped my handlebar, and I went over the top and into the street. And Now we got a broken arm. This is one of those moments starting the new year where there's just a lot going on, and it's really easy to fall into that downward spiral of this is another thing to deal with, right? How many meetings am I canceling? Am I going to get on the flight? What am I going to have to deal with or navigate? Or does it become another part of a good story that can possibly help someone else? So knowing that the social connectedness is a necessity, what do? I still have my strong hand. Let me call a buddy of mine who I like to play pickleball with. I don't think I can just go play a game of pickleball and bounce around because I have two fractures in my arm, but I can probably stand there and catch up on life and just hit the pickleball back and forth for an hour, right? I had zero emotional desire, but I understood the positive outcome. So we go and hit a pickleball for an hour and we talk about life and we catch up and I feel great by the time I get home. The introverted side also feels a little tired. I'm ready to just sit on the couch with my puppies. But that 1 hour of social interaction fed all sorts of good to help me feel better and to know that I did something good for my well-being. So I don't know, you asked what else we want to talk about. That was something that had crossed my mind before we started the conversation. And I don't know where it might go from here, but the purpose for sharing is this is why I'm wearing a t-shirt. This happened. And let's reach out and connect with other people because even if we don't want to do it, whether it's for social networking or not, it feeds our well-being.
It's true. There is a true endorphin rush when you speak to a stranger. And I said, think about you're standing in line at the grocery store, and maybe there's a child in the cart up front of you, and he does something funny or cute, and you look at the parents, and there's just this kind of little grin and giggle, and that was very cute. And you walk away, and you still have a smile on your face. And it doesn't have to be some like big, deep conversation that you have with another person. It's just a moment where you
Yeah.
recognized each other's humanness and moved on through your day and thought that made me feel better. I feel like a lot of times in today's society, we have we are bombarded with so much negativity about the news and political candidates that we forget that these folks are humans.
Mhm.
They want to eat, they want to sleep, they want to make sure their children are fed, they want to enjoy their work and their play, and they have animals and all the things that we do. And there is much more that we have in common than we have differences. And if we would speak to each other as if we were curious about those other people and open our minds a little bit. There's the right, there's the left, and in the middle where the truth lies. And
Yes.
you can't get to the truth if we are always just staying in our echo chamber. And it does such good for us mentally. I really feel like that was the greatest harm, although there were a million deaths in the United States from COVID, but I think the mental harm of isolation did us so much more harm than being sick. I had it twice. I certainly don't want to get it again. But fortunately for me, I had the means to not be isolated. I was on a lot of social media stuff. I was doing a lot of Zoom meetings. I was on the board of directors for Vet Partners. We still had our meetings. We had lots of things to do. And there was a lot of people I was interacting with. But I thought loneliness is a huge problem. And like you, I am an ambivert. Most people would think I'm some kind of super extrovert because I do love people and I like to be in crowds of people and meet new people. But when I come home, I crash. So for 4 days after VMX, I did nothing. I stayed in the
Yes.
I didn't do anything except just rest. Um, and I think people just need to realize that um, reaching out to another person is not as scary as they think because most people actually enjoy having a conversation with people, and especially somebody who admires you. That's
Yeah.
fun to have a small fan club, I guess you could say, of people who admire your work and come to you and say, "Hey, you made a difference. I learned from you." That is always keeps us moving and keeps us motivated learn more and do more and teach more. So thank you for bringing that up because I think it is so important. Um, and I got to ask about the fun fact, but I really want to focus the fun fact on which of the continents you missed.
Antarctica.
Antarctica.
Yeah, I've got there was a moment in my history where my interest in photography was fed by a Nat Geo wildlife photographer, and he mentored me for several years. You mentioned in my bio, there's a nonprofit organization I work with, and that operates on five continents. My travels within those continents uh, became connected with my wildlife photography. So I've photographed all over the world, and my eventual trip to Antarctica, of which I had planned the year COVID broke, 2020, uh, will be a photography expedition. And it's a difficult one to plan because you're gone for a full month. And of course, you can imagine it's very expensive. So a lot of planning, one for being gone, and two, just to save up to be able to book the trip. However, I will get there soon, and I'll be spending some time with some king penguins and Adelie penguins and chinstrap penguins, and I love penguins, and I haven't gotten to photograph penguins in an Arctic. I photographed the South Africa penguins down at Border Beach, just outside of Cape Town, but I haven't photographed the cold weather penguins yet. So that's next on my list. Yeah.
Well, our mutual Vet Partners member, Cami Bailey, just got back from
Uh,
Antarctica. So she could, if you want to reach out to her, she could give you the scoop on it. And I said, well, how was it? And she said, very cold, but I would go back. She said it was just incredible. So I feel like I don't know if that's a trip for me. I hate to be cold and I don't like snow. So
uh,
there's a reason I moved to Myrtle Beach. It's because I'm in warm weather 90% of the time. So tell us just briefly, is the organization, the nonprofit, does that still exist?
It does. It does. It's called Sage Global. Teenage entrepreneurs build and operate businesses. It's not a virtual experience. These are real operating businesses, and their businesses have to either meet or address social needs. So for 24 years now, we've been supporting teens that have these social enterprises, and we host a global tournament at the end of each year. If you think about the NCAA basketball tournament, instead of North Carolina against Duke, it's it's Nigeria against Ireland, right? USA against Brazil. It's like the World Cup of soccer, but it's a World Cup of teenage entrepreneurs. And by the end, we have some of the most incredible teenage entrepreneurs with amazing businesses. And these are live, thriving businesses. And again, from all over the world. The first teenager ever to receive funding on the TV show Shark Tank was one of our teenagers. It was an electronic recycling business that he started, and Mark Cuban invested a bunch of money for him on the TV show. So it's been a wild ride supporting these kids from all over the world, and it's also opened doors to work with other organizations and other people from all over the world. And yeah, it's awesome, and it's not even really a side hustle. I started this with a former professor of mine in college for extra credit, and it was never intended to become this. Um, but it is a nonprofit of which there are no full-time paid employees. My entire team are volunteers, myself included. So it's been a pretty cool ride, and it feels good to know that our focus is on supporting and growing the life skills for these kids.
That is, as an entrepreneur, and we both own our own businesses, I feel like there is a great growth in entrepreneurship. I feel like young people are willing to take a chance. They have ideas. They spend their youth thinking about how to fix and solve problems and create solutions. And I think that's wonderful. I don't know that when I was young, there there was that kind of community that said, "Oh, just because you're 15 doesn't mean you can't start a business." Uh, you could, but it wasn't as transparent that you could do it then as you can now. But I think it's
Definitely.
and I think some amazing ideas come out of young people because they have a perspective that people, as you get older, you just see your world. You see what your pain points are. You see what you need solutions for. And it's very difficult to think outside your age bracket. But there's other people who see those things so clearly. And maybe because they're not clouded by, a mortgage and family and all the other things that most adults have to deal with, that they can
Yes.
spend their time and focus on just some brilliant idea. And they
There-
there's support behind them that allows a spotlight to be shined on that. So thank you for starting that and for that. That's really wonderful. Um,
it is. And I agree. Thank you for recognizing it. And yes, you're spot on. A teenager's inability to risk assess the way we do frees their mind for much higher levels of innovative thought. And the way that can apply to us in vet med, just give consideration to one idea, just one, which is if you've got a 5-year-old at home or a friend's 5-year-old who can bring them into your hospital for a day, spend half the day with that 5-year-old in your hospital and let them ask questions and make sure you record all the questions that they ask because the lens that they're going to look through, being far different than ours, of course, guaranteed will uncover some details that are right in front of you and yet we're blind to see because of all the other stuff on our minds. So make it an annual thing. One day a year, bring your 5-year-old to work and let them ask all the questions because they're going to find things that can be helpful for you that you've never thought of.
Well, it's funny that you say that, and the first thing that popped into my mind is when I was managing hospitals, I would instruct our team members when we were cleaning to stand on their heads and look underneath things. I said, because we're standing up doing stuff, and our clients are seated, and when they're seated, they're bored, and they're staring at all the stuff that's in this exam room, including whatever gradu is underneath that table. And so we don't
Yes.
have that available. So let's take a look. So I think the 5-year-old viewpoint is great. And it's true, they will ask questions about all kinds of stuff and and why things are where they are. And a lot of times we can't see our own way out of things. And so getting that perspective, it's one of the reasons that we do consulting work. I this perspective thing, this I think about this practice that called me one day and they said, "Debbie, we are just crazy. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, this place is a zoo and we cannot figure out what is going on. We need you to come and observe." And so I spent the day observing and I listened to the two lead receptionists and the office manager tell every single soul who was coming to pick up their surgical cases to come at 4 o'clock. And I said, "Is there any reason that you can't say you come at 3, you come at 3:15, you come at 3:30, 3:45, 4 o'clock?" And they went, "No, but we've always done it this way." And so
Yeah.
I said, "Well, let's try that tomorrow." And we did. And the whole lobby smoothed out because they didn't have the world to come in at 4 o'clock.
Yes. Yes.
It was if everything was that easy. But that's the power of an outside observation because we do get tunnel vision. We can't see it anymore. We can't see the holes in the wall or the paint scraped off or the hole in the parking lot because we just drive around it every day.
Yes.
Yeah, so great. Okay, anything you would like to say, shout out to somebody who maybe that guy who talked you into working in vet med?
I'll start with, of course, a shout out to you. We've passed each other in the halls for many years, and it's always been a smile or, no, that face. We've been in the same rooms even, and to finally get a chance to sit down and talk and begin to get to know you. All of the positives that the industry knows of you and may have not had an opportunity to experience on hand. I want to make sure everyone knows that it's even better in person.
Oh, you.
You are everything that is right about this industry. And thank you for being a positive example and for opening your door for others to jump on the train and go along for the ride with you. So thank you for what you're doing for our industry. We need more of you.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I love this industry and I do what I can to give back to it and to make sure that when I do decide to leave it, it's going to be better than when I started in it. That's my goal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, yes, and yes. The other shout out I will give is because I think this is there's two names that are directly connected to me getting an opportunity to meet you. One was or is Luis Dunn. Luis grabbed me by the horse collar and pulled me into a vet partners reception a while back, and quite literally took me person by person. You have to meet this person. You have to meet every 5 minutes. She took me to somebody new. And it was such an awesome experience. One of those people that she took me to was another individual who I've passed in the halls many times over the years. We'd even had brief hellos, but we'd never really talked and gotten to know each other. But it was Dr. Peter Weinstein. And Peter and I happened to live within an hour's drive of each other. So we started having frequent lunch meetings together. And he became very influential for me joining Vet Partners and helping to guide me toward people to build relationships with, you being one of them. So
Yeah, well,
Luis and Dr. Weinstein, thank you to them. And I'm looking forward to continuing the growing relationship with you as well.
great. Well, I'll give the shout out to Louise too because Louise and I grew up in practices almost across the street from each other.
Oh,
She
wow.
was managing, and when she started consulting, I remember that. And then when I was thinking about starting a consulting practice, I called Louise and we had lunch. And her advice to me was, "Don't do it. You'll be gone all the time. What is your husband going to think about it?" And so I took that into consideration. She said, "Just find two or three practices locally and manage the practices. You'll probably be better off." But I did not listen, and here we are. So okay. And then Peter and I are friends, and we love to stand in the back of the room, if you had noticed that, and make smart ass remarks to each other. And so we have a good time in the back of
Perfect.
yes, but I do admire Peter and I love the way he thinks and his willingness to um shake up the status quo and speak his mind because I feel like that is an extremely important part of what people who have been in this profession for a long time and who have a big picture view of it need to be doing because we try not to have tunnel vision and try to bring in outside perspective. With Peter, it was the e-myth work. And with me, I spend a lot of time in human side health, customer experience stuff, and try to bring those kind of things into, and of course, restaurant and hospitality, which is where I grew up. So I feel like we can grow that med in multitudes of ways to make it better if we get out of our little bubble and explore what is happening out in other industries that they're doing and they're doing it well and we can do the same thing. Absolutely.
Yes. Very well said.
All right. Well, Rob, thank you again for being on. We will have all your information in the show notes along with your bio. So our guest will be able to reach out to you, and you are in California. So we're doing East Coast, West Coast stuff here today, each one of us on the our sides of the ocean. And I look forward to seeing you again in Kansas City at Vet Partners and along the trail, who knows where. But now we know each other, and now we will make sure we make a point of finding each other when we are out there in all these conferences and venues and random places that consultants show up.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you so much, Debbie. I really appreciate you and the time. And what a treat. This has been so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you.